Imagine you're standing at the head of this massive mahogany table in a corporate boardroom.
Oh, yeah, the classic high-stakes environment.
Right. And the air in the room is practically freezing. Your division just posted a quarterly loss in the millions.
Never a fun position to be in.
Absolutely not. A highly anticipated product launch has completely collapsed, and the board of directors is just staring intensely at you, waiting for an explanation.
And you've probably got, like, a folder of excuses ready to go.
Exactly. You have this folder right in front of you, and inside it is a perfectly documented, entirely valid list of excuses. I mean, the supply chain completely fractured in Asia.
Right, something totally out of your control.
Yeah, and the marketing department misinterpreted the demographic data. The engineering team missed 3 critical deadlines because of software bugs. None of those specific things were, your direct hands-on fault.
So you're ready to just slide that folder across the table and say, hey, I was set up to fail.
Completely prepared to do that. But what if the only way to save your job, save your division, and earn the unshakable respect of every person in that room is to throw that folder in the trash?
Wow. Just ditch it completely.
Just ditch it. You look the board in the eye and you tell them that every single cascading failure is entirely 100% your fault.
I mean, honestly, that sounds like career suicide to most people.
It really does.
The human instinct for self-preservation just kicks in, right?
Mm-hmm.
We immediately want to point the finger outward. But what you're describing is actually the absolute core of true leadership.
Yeah.
It's the mechanism that separates teams that fracture under pressure from teams that adapt and conquer.
Well, welcome to this deep dive. Today, we are undertaking a really comprehensive exploration of the principles laid out in the book Extreme Ownership.
Yeah, written by former U.S. Navy SEALs Jocko Willink and Leif Babin.
Right. And our mission for you today is to extract the gritty, hard-won combat leadership principles forged in some of the most dangerous urban warfare in modern history and translate them directly into your modern corporate scenarios.
Because, whether you're a CEO, a mid-level manager trying to hold a department together, or even just an individual contributor looking to take control of your career, these concepts act as a fundamental operating system.
An operating system for human interaction and success, basically.
Exactly. But to truly grasp the gravity of this operating system, we have to look closely at the crucible where it was pressure tested.
Right. We need to set the scene.
Yeah, so the primary backdrop for these insights is the 2006 Battle of Ramadi in Iraq. Specifically, the experiences of Naval Special Warfare Task Unit Bruiser.
And Ramadi in 2006 was, it was really bad, right?
It was the deadly epicenter of the Iraqi insurgency. It was an absolute unrelenting war zone. We're talking pulverized concrete, labyrinthine streets, and daily continuous violence.
Just a completely chaotic environment.
Unbelievably chaotic. A leaked U.S. military intelligence report at the time grimly labeled Ramadi and the wider Anbar province as all but lost.
Wow. All but lost.
Yeah, every single day, American forces were stepping into the meat grinder. And I think it's incredibly important to establish right now that the source material we're analyzing today is not some glorified chest-thumping war story.
Right. It's not like an action movie.
No, not at all. It's a profoundly sobering, humbling look at the cost of warfare. Task Unit Bruiser achieved legendary success, but they paid a devastating toll.
Yeah, including the tragic loss of teammates like Mark Lee, Mike Mansour, and Ryan Jobe.
Alongside many other brave soldiers and Marines. And from the ashes of that environment, from the absolute extremes of human stress and consequence, the authors distilled an undeniable reality.
Which is that leadership is the single most important factor on the battlefield.
Exactly. The single most important factor.
Which brings us right back to that boardroom, because translating the deadly high-explosive streets of Ramadi to a corporate office park in Ohio sounds like an impossible leap.
It does seem like a stretch at first glance.
Right. But okay, let's unpack this. Let's look at leadership not as a personality trait, not as charisma or being an extrovert. Let's look at it as an operating system.
I like that analogy.
Yeah, because if your computer's OS has a fundamental bug, it doesn't matter how beautifully designed your individual apps are.
Right. The moment you put the system under a heavy processing load, everything crashes.
Exactly. Everything just freezes up. And in a business, your apps are your team members, your software tools, your logistics networks.
So if the leadership OS is flawed, the talent of your team just can't save you.
It really can't. So before a leader can attempt to direct anyone else, they have to run a diagnostic on themselves. They have to look in the mirror.
That's the hardest part.
It is. So let's get right into the foundational mindset required to boot up this system.
Okay, so the overarching concept is termed extreme ownership. And the authors introduced this not with a story of triumph, but with an absolute nightmare scenario.
Yeah, this part of the source material was intense.
Very. They detail an incident in the Malab district of Ramadi. It was a blue-on-blue engagement.
And just for context, blue on blue being the military term for friendly fire,
Right.
a fratricide. Literally the worst thing that can happen in combat.
Exactly. Jocko Willink, as the commander of Task Unit Bruiser, had coordinated this massive multi-element operation. It was early morning, still dark, and the environment was just pure chaos.
So like a literal fog of war.
A literal fog of war, burning tires, dust storms, pulverized buildings, and a figurative fog of war that was thick with broken communications, competing radio frequencies, and overwhelming stress.
Just a logistical nightmare. Who all was involved in this operation?
So they had SEAL snipers positioned on rooftops. They had Iraqi army soldiers moving through the streets. They had U.S. Army troops and Marine Corps elements providing heavy support and calling in airstrikes.
Okay, so it sounds like trying to conduct a symphony in the middle of a hurricane.
That's a perfect way to describe it. And in that hurricane, the system broke down. A rogue element of Iraqi soldiers strayed far outside their designated operational boundaries.
Oh man, in the dark.
In the dark. And a SEAL sniper team, heavily fortified in a building, spotted these armed men moving aggressively through the dark. Believing they were under attack by insurgents, the SEALs engaged an Iraqi soldier.
Because they had no idea friendly troops were in that sector.
Right, so gunfire is immediately exchanged. The Iraqi soldiers, now taking fire from a building and assuming it was full of insurgents, called for immediate reinforcements.
Oh no, it just cascades.
It does. Within minutes, you had U.S. Marines and Army troops rolling up in armored vehicles, pouring heavy machine gun fire into a building that contained their own SEALs.
That is, I can't even imagine.
And the SEALs, pinned down and taking heavy fire, were actively calling for tank support to level the buildings around them.
I cannot even fathom the adrenaline and the panic. I mean, it was a hair's breadth away from being an absolute massacre.
It was. It really was. Ultimately, the chain of fire was stopped, but the cost was terrible. One Iraqi soldier was killed, several others were wounded, and one of the SEALs was wounded in the face by shrapnel.
Wow. And so as the dust settles, Jocko is back at base, sitting in front of a computer, reading the damage reports pouring in.
Right, trying to piece together what just happened.
And he gets word that his commanding officer, an investigating officer, and a high-ranking admiral are on their way to Ramadi to investigate.
Yeah, they want answers immediately.
He has to build a debriefing presentation explaining exactly what went wrong, and when he looks at the facts, he has a massive, tangled web of blame.
A completely justifiable web of blame, to be clear. I mean, the Iraqi soldiers blatantly ignored the boundary lines.
Right.
The SEAL sniper element didn't properly communicate their exact rooftop location to the passing patrol.
Okay, that's two failures right there.
And the overarching communication plan was ambiguous. With too many elements on different radio frequencies, Jocko could have pointed the finger at half a dozen different people.
Which is exactly what human psychology pushes us to do. We want to categorize the failure, isolate the bad variables, and protect our own status.
Exactly. It's self-preservation.
If the Iraqi troops hadn't moved, the SEALs wouldn't have shot. Just a simple cause and effect defense.
But as Jocko is looking at that PowerPoint slide detailing all the failures of his subordinates, he has a realization. He realizes that if he blames the Iraqi soldiers or his radio man or the sniper, he isn't actually solving the systemic issue.
Right, he's just passing the buck.
He is essentially telling his commanding officers, I have no control over this. So they convene the debrief. The room is packed. The commanding officers are there.
The tension must have been unbelievable.
Oh, absolutely. The SEAL who took shrapnel to the face is sitting right there, heavily bandaged. And Jocko stands up and asks the room, whose fault was this?
And this is where it gets fascinating. Because of the culture of the SEAL teams, everyone actually tries to fall on their sword.
Right, they all step up.
The sniper raises his hand and says, "It's my fault. I didn't positively identify my target." The radio man says, "It's my fault. I didn't pass our exact grid coordinates fast enough." The combat advisor says, "It's my fault. I failed to control the movement of the Iraqi troops."
But Jocko stops them all. He looks at his men and says, no, there is only one person to blame for this, and that is me. I am the commander. I am responsible for the entire operation. There is no one to blame but me.
He just owned it completely, unconditionally.
He did. He explained that if the plan wasn't clear, it was his fault for not simplifying it. If the subordinate didn't execute their boundaries, it was his fault for not training them properly or ensuring they understood the lethal consequences of straying.
By taking all the blame, he paradoxically takes all the power back.
Yeah.
Because when you blame others, you surrender your agency. You're basically saying, I am a victim of my team's incompetence.
Yes.
But by owning it, you secure the authority to fix it.
Precisely. Which translates seamlessly to that boardroom scenario we started with.
And let's talk about that.
Yeah, so the authors detail their consulting work with a VP of manufacturing at a major corporation. This VP's vision had completely failed to meet their production objectives for the quarter.
So millions on the line.
Millions. The board of directors was furious. Revenue was down. And the VP was doing exactly what Jocko almost did. He was preparing a slide deck of valid excuses.
Right. He was going to tell the board that the third-party transport company was consistently late, which delayed raw materials.
Yep.
And the parts suppliers sent defective components. And the factory floor workers were making too many assembly errors.
But after attending a leadership workshop based on these combat principles, that VP completely scrapped his presentation.
He threw away the folder.
He threw it away. He walked into that hostile boardroom, stood at the head of the table, and took 100% of the blame.
What did he actually say?
He said, "This massive failure is on me. I failed to force execution. I knew the transport company had a history of delays, and I didn't build in a buffer or source a backup. I didn't implement a rigorous quality assurance check for our parts suppliers before they hit the assembly line. And I clearly didn't train our floor workers adequately on the new machinery."
Man, I can just imagine the board members bracing themselves for a fight, ready to argue with his excuses, and suddenly all the air goes out of the room. He disarmed them completely.
Completely. And he didn't just stop at an apology. After taking the blame, he laid out a highly detailed, concrete plan of exactly what he was going to do differently over the next 30 days to fix those systemic vulnerabilities.
Most middle managers would think a presentation like that is handing the board the rope to hang them with. You'd think the board would fire him on the spot.
Right, that's the fear.
But the exact opposite happens. The board's respect for him skyrocketed because they finally saw someone who wasn't going to hide behind the supply chain. They saw a leader who was actively managing the chaos.
Taking extreme ownership doesn't make you look weak or incompetent. It makes you look incredibly strong, self-aware, and in control of the variables.
Yeah.
But this mindset extends far beyond just taking the bullet in a board meeting. It fundamentally challenges how we view the people working beneath us. Which brings us to the myth of the bad team.
Oh, I love this concept. Because every manager on earth has looked at a certain group of employees and thought, these people are just a last cause. I have a bad team.
It's so common.
To dismantle this, the source material takes us to BODES, which is Basic Underwater Demolition SEAL Training. Specifically, the Crucible of Hell Week.
Yeah. For context, Hell Week is designed to push human beings past their perceived physical and mental limits. It is essentially 5.5 days of continuous physical exertion, freezing cold Pacific Ocean water, mud, sand, and a total of roughly 4 hours of sleep for the entire week.
Just brutal.
The trainees are broken down into boat crews of 7 men. These men have to carry a massive 200-pound inflatable rubber boat on their heads everywhere they go.
And the instructors are constantly pitting the boat crews against each other in grueling races, right? Over the sand dunes, through the surf zone.
Right, and in the specific BUDS class Leif Babin was instructing, there was a stark disparity. Boat Crew 2 was an absolute machine. They were winning almost every single race.
Okay, so they're the all-stars.
But Boat Crew 6 was a disaster. They were coming in dead last every single time.
And what's going on with Boat Crew 6? Why are they failing so badly?
The psychology of Boat Crew 6 is what's critical here. They weren't just losing, they were fundamentally broken as a unit. They were exhausted, miserable, and they had turned on each other.
The blame game.
Exactly. They were constantly bickering, cursing each other out under the weight of the boat, and blaming each other for their agonizing losses. The leader of Boat Crew 6 was clearly defeated. He believed he had just been handed a roster of weak guys, and there was nothing he could do about it.
So the instructors decide to run this unofficial psychological experiment. They pull the leaders aside. They take the highly effective, confident leader of the dominating Boat Crew 2, and they order him to take over the failing Boat Crew 6.
Right.
And they take the complaining, excuse-making leader of Boat Crew 6 and put him in charge of the all-star Boat Crew 2.
Now, if leadership is just a component and talent is the deciding factor, Boat Crew 2 should still win, right? They still have the biggest, fastest, most cohesive guys.
That would be the logical assumption.
But in the very next race, which was this brutal paddle through the pounding surf, Boat Crew 6, the team that had been dead last all week, suddenly surged to the front. They won the race.
Wait, really?
They beat Boat Crew 2, and for the rest of Hell Week, Boat Crew 6 continued to win or come in a very close second.
That is just wild. It's the exact same 6 guys under that rubber boat. The muscle mass didn't change. The exhaustion level didn't change. The only variable that changed in the entire equation was the mind at the front of the boat.
What's fascinating here is it reveals a profound, unyielding truth about organizational dynamics. There are no bad teams, only bad leaders.
Wow.
The original leader of Boat Crew 6 had accepted mediocrity. He tolerated failure. He believed it was impossible to win with the hand he was dealt, and that toxic belief infected his entire crew.
But the new leader came in with a different mindset.
Right. He came in with an extreme ownership mindset. He didn't care about the past losses. He didn't accept excuses about being tired. He demanded that they coordinate their efforts, paddle in unison, and support each other. He enforced a completely new standard of performance.
Because, as the authors drive home so effectively, when it comes to the culture and performance of your team, it is never about what you preach in a memo. It's exclusively about what you tolerate in reality.
Yes. If you tolerate a team member showing up late and giving half effort, that becomes the new baseline standard for everyone.
The corporate equivalent they provide for this is incredibly common. They were called in to consult at a massive financial services company. This company was bleeding money because they had recently rolled out a major new technology product, and it was a catastrophic failure.
Yeah, the product was glitchy, it didn't meet customer needs, and the rollout was a mess.
The guy at the helm of this disaster was the chief technology officer. The authors refer to him as the tortured genius.
We all know this archetype in the corporate world.
We really do. The person who is undeniably brilliant. Maybe they built the company's original code base, but they possess the emotional intelligence of a rock.
Exactly. When the executive team sat down with the consultants to dissect the failure, the tortured genius CTO immediately went on the defensive. He threw up a massive wall of blame.
Who did he blame?
He blamed the sales team, claiming they were too ignorant to understand the sheer elegance of his software. He blamed the marketing department for setting the wrong expectations. He even blamed the CEO for rushing his timeline.
My favorite part is when he literally sits in the boardroom, looks at the catastrophic financial data, and says out loud, "We may not be winning, but we are making the right decisions."
It is the ultimate delusion born of ego. I mean, if your company is hemorrhaging capital, losing market share, and failing to deliver a working product to your customers, your decisions are, by definition, incorrect.
Right.
But because he viewed himself as a genius, he felt his brilliance was merely misunderstood by lesser minds. He refused to look in the mirror. He refused to take ownership of the failed rollout. And because he wouldn't own the failure, he fundamentally lacked the ability to identify the root causes and fix them.
So what happened to him?
The CEO eventually had to realize that you can't code your way out of a leadership deficit. He fired the tortured genius.
Had to be done.
And the moment they brought in a new CTO, someone who possessed an extreme ownership mindset, who sat down with the sales team to understand their struggles, who simplified the product interface, the entire technology division rapidly turned around.
Now, hold on. I need to push back here on behalf of every stressed out middle manager listening to this right now.
Okay, let's hear it.
Let's really stress test this concept. I can hear someone thinking, okay, taking the blame for a bad rollout makes sense. But what if I have an employee who blatantly ignores standard operating procedures? Let's say they violate a clear safety protocol, or they send an incredibly offensive email to a client. Am I supposed to walk into my boss's office and say, "I take ownership of Steve's offensive email"? How is that fair to me?
Yeah, it feels wrong.
It feels like a head coach taking the blame because a wide receiver tripped over his own feet and dropped a perfectly thrown pass in the end zone.
It is a deeply uncomfortable pill to swallow, and it often feels profoundly unfair in the moment. But let's follow your football analogy, because the authors would validate that, yes, the dropped pass is still ultimately the head coach's fault.
How so?
Let's break down why. The coach owns the training. Did they run that specific route against that specific defensive coverage enough times in practice under high stress?
Okay, but what if they practiced it 1,000 times and the receiver just lost focus?
Then the coach owns the communication of the stakes. Did the coach effectively communicate the vital importance of psychological focus on that specific down and distance?
Mhm.
But let's take it even further to your corporate example. If Steve sends an offensive email or repeatedly violates a safety protocol, you have to ask yourself, have I made the behavioral boundaries explicitly clear? Have I explained the why behind the professionalism standards?
Okay, but what if I have? What if Steve is just a jerk? What if corporate HR has completely tied my hands? They put Steve on a 6-month performance improvement plan, the paperwork takes forever, and I physically cannot fire him. My roster is locked by bureaucracy. How can I take extreme ownership of a bad roster when I don't have the authority to change it?
That is the ultimate friction point. If you cannot fire Steve, then taking extreme ownership means you own the management of Steve's limitations.
What does that look like practically?
It means you don't assign Steve to forward-facing client communications. You require Steve's emails to be drafted and reviewed before sending. You shadow him on the safety protocols. If you know Steve is a liability and you continue to put him in positions where he can damage the company, you are tolerating the standard.
Ah, I see.
If HR is the roadblock, then you must take extreme ownership of managing up to HR, documenting every single infraction meticulously, and building an undeniable case that forces their hand. You never throw your hands up and say, HR won't let me fix it. You figure out a new tactic to solve the problem.
That is a brutally heavy burden. It means the buck never stops anywhere else.
That is heavy, yes.
But as the source material points out, it's also incredibly empowering because it means you are never a helpless victim of circumstance.
Exactly.
So taking the blame and accepting the burden is step one. But here's the catch. You cannot fake it. You can't just memorize the words, "it's my fault," and say them like a robot while secretly seething with resentment.
People will see right through that.
Total. To genuinely lead, you need total internal alignment. And that requires two massive psychological shifts, which we'll unpack now. It requires finding absolute belief, and it requires ruthlessly checking your ego.
Let's start with belief. Before you can convince a team to execute a difficult, dangerous, or tedious plan, you have to genuinely believe in the mission yourself.
Right.
Your team possesses a radar for your authenticity. If they sense that you think the plan is stupid, their execution will reflect that apathy. The authors illustrate this with a monumental strategic shift during their deployment. Task Unit Bruiser received an order from higher headquarters that dictated they must conduct all future operations by, with, and through Iraqi security forces.
And the SEALs absolutely despise this order.
They hated it.
From their perspective, they were the most highly trained elite special operators on the planet. They moved in silence, they operated with surgical precision. And now, some general sitting in an air-conditioned office in another city was telling them they had to bring along poorly trained, poorly equipped, noisy Iraqi troops on every single raid.
It felt like a massive liability.
Yeah, the Iraqi soldiers often didn't have night vision, their weapons discipline was questionable, and there was a very real fear that insurgent sympathizers had infiltrated their ranks.
Yeah.
It felt like an unnecessary liability that was going to get Americans killed. Jocko openly admits he looked at the order and thought, this is insane.
But Jocko understood a fundamental rule of leadership. He could not walk into the platoon room, look his men in the eye, and say, hey guys, the brass in Washington gave us this stupid order. I think it's a terrible idea, but we just have to follow it.
Which is exactly what we see happening in corporate break rooms every single day.
Yeah.
The manager rolls their eyes and says, corporate is making us use this terrible new software. Let's just get through it.
Exactly. When a leader does that, they instantly destroy their team's belief in the mission. They fracture the chain of command. If the leader doesn't believe in the plan, why should the team risk their lives, or in a business context, expend their discretionary effort to execute it?
So what did Jocko do?
So Jocko realized he had a profound obligation to figure out the why. If he didn't understand why the strategy made sense, he had to ask himself and continually ask his commanding officers until he found the underlying logic.
He had to trace the strategic thread all the way to the top. And when he did, he realized the ultimate truth of the Iraq War. U.S. forces, no matter how lethal or effective, could not stay in Ramadi forever.
Right, there had to be an exit strategy.
Exactly. They couldn't pacify every street and hold it indefinitely. The only way to eventually stabilize the region so that U.S. troops could go home to their families was to train the Iraqi security forces to stand on their own 2 feet and police their own cities. Partnering with them wasn't just a bureaucratic nuisance, it was the entire exit strategy for the war.
And once Jocko internalized that overarching why, his belief became genuine. He could stand in front of his highly skeptical, frustrated SEALs and authentically explain the immense strategic value of the order.
So he reframed it for them.
Yes. He told them, "We are going to train these guys so well that they can take over and we can go home." Because he believed it, he could convey that conviction, and his men fell in line and executed the strategy flawlessly.
Let's bring this straight into the corporate world, because the authors provide a perfect translation. They describe working with a group of mid-level managers at a large business. These managers are sitting in a corporate training session, and they are in a state of full mutiny.
Mutiny over what?
The company has just rolled out a brand new compensation and commission plan for the sales force. The managers are loudly complaining that the new plan is terrible, the quotas are unreachable, it's going to drive away all their top-performing salespeople, and the CEO is completely detached from reality.
I've seen that happen. And the consultants pause the session and point out to these managers that they are completely failing at extreme ownership. They're pointing fingers up the chain of command. The consultants ask them, "Do you understand why the CEO implemented this new compensation structure?"
And what do they say?
The managers admit they have no idea.
Which means they failed in their duty as leaders. If the managers don't understand the why, they are at fault for not marching into the CEO's office or their director's office and asking questions until the logic becomes clear.
Right, there's always a reason.
Maybe the company is facing a massive cash flow crisis that the sales team isn't aware of. Maybe the profit margins on the legacy products shrank, and the new compensation plan is specifically designed to incentivize the sales team to push a new, higher-margin product line that will save the company from bankruptcy.
By blaming the CEO and commiserating with their sales teams about how unfair the new plan is, these managers were actively destroying their own team's morale and productivity. If you don't understand the why, you cannot lead. You must ask questions up the chain until the strategic necessity clicks into place.
But let's be real for a second. What if the CEO was just terrible at communicating? What if you go into the CEO's office and ask why, and they just bark, "Because I said so, hit your numbers"? How do you find belief then?
That happens all the time. In that scenario, extreme ownership means you have to reverse engineer the why yourself. You have to look at the market data, look at the competitor landscape, and look at the company's financials and construct the logical narrative that your CEO failed to provide.
So you have to connect the dots for them.
You have to figure out the business case for the mandate and then translate that to your team. You own the narrative.
Which is incredibly hard to do because constructing that narrative and humbling yourself to ask questions in the first place requires you to check something incredibly heavy at the door, which is your ego.
Ego is the great silencer.
Think of ego like a pair of high-end noise-canceling headphones. It feels great when you put them on because it completely blocks out the uncomfortable static of criticism, doubt, and dissenting opinions. But those headphones also make you completely deaf to the blaring alarm bells warning you that your plan is about to drive the company off a cliff.
That is a phenomenal analogy. To illustrate the danger of ego, the source material recounts a chaotic attack on Camp Corregidor, a major U.S. base in Ramadi.
Oh man, the imagery in this story is just wild.
It really is. So the camp suddenly comes under heavy, coordinated insurgent attack. Mortars are dropping, heavy machine gun fire is raking the compound. Jocko sprints up the stairs to the roof of the Tactical Operations Center to get eyes on the battlefield.
And what does he see?
As he's looking around, he sees his SEALs arriving to join the firefight by the dozen. But the attack caught them so off guard during their downtime that many of them are sprinting to the roof in flip-flops, board shorts, and T-shirts, hastily throwing their heavy Kevlar helmets and body armor over their casual clothes, gripping their weapons.
It's an almost comical image, but the lesson they pull from this is deadly serious. It's about the razor-thin line between confidence and cockiness. In the SEAL teams, they take immense, justifiable pride in their history, their rigorous training, and their lethality. They have to be supremely confident to do their jobs. But if that confidence calcifies into arrogance, if they let their ego convince them that they are too good to fail, or that the enemy is too primitive to launch a sophisticated surprise attack, they will get caught in flip-flops. They will get people killed. Ego clouds rational judgment.
And in the business world, ego is arguably the single biggest killer of extreme ownership. When a manager's ego is threatened, they revert to defensive tribalism. The authors share a scenario about a manager named Gary.
Tell me about Gary.
Gary oversees operations at a drilling company, and he is managing a highly skilled drilling superintendent. This superintendent has decades of experience on the rigs. He knows the mechanics of drilling better than anyone, but he has a glaring flaw. He repeatedly ignores the company's standardized safety and reporting procedures.
Right, so he's a cowboy. And Gary's ego is highly triggered by this. Gary feels disrespected. His internal monologue is saying, I am the boss. I have the title. This guy is openly defying my authority.
Gary wants to march out to the rig, bring the hammer down, yell at the guy, and say, follow my rules or pack your bags. He wants to win a power struggle.
Here's where it gets really interesting. Applying extreme ownership and actively taking off those noise-canceling headphones of ego means Gary has to take a completely counterintuitive approach.
He has to swallow his pride.
He has to swallow his pride, walk up to that superintendent and say two of the hardest words in the English language, I failed. Gary has to look at him and say, I failed to explain to you why these reporting procedures are absolutely critical. You know more about the mechanics of drilling than I ever will, but I haven't done my job in showing you how these safety reports protect the company from massive liabilities, and how failing to file them costs us hundreds of thousands of dollars in compliance fines. It is my fault for not making the parameters clear.
He has to completely disarm the conflict by absorbing the blame. Because if Gary attacks the superintendent's ego, the superintendent will just push back, resent him, and probably quit, taking decades of institutional knowledge with him. By Gary checking his own ego, he gives the superintendent the psychological safety to check his.
Precisely. It's like a software update. You can't successfully install it in your team if it hasn't successfully downloaded in you. You have to believe in the mission, and you have to strip away your own ego to communicate it effectively.
That's the perfect way to put it.
Once a leader has installed this internal mindset, extreme ownership, belief, and checked ego, they are finally ready to step onto the battlefield. They are ready to direct the team. This brings us to the tactical mechanics of execution. The source material outlines specific laws of combat.
Let's dive into these because they are so directly applicable to organizational structure. The first law of combat is cover and move.
So teamwork.
In simple terms, it means teamwork. But we aren't just talking about doing trust falls at a corporate retreat. We are talking about teamwork on a macro, interdepartmental scale. Leif Babin tells a story about a massive mistake he made regarding this law.
Set the scene for us.
Leif was leading a SEAL element, which he designated as OP2. They were deep in enemy territory, and a situation degraded rapidly, forcing Leif to extract his team and move them back to friendly lines through a highly dangerous sector of the city.
They're moving through alleys, watching rooftops, totally exposed.
Exactly. But in his intense focus on navigating his immediate element to safety, Leif completely forgot about another SEAL element operating nearby, designated OP1. OP1 was positioned in a high-rise building with a commanding view of the exact route Leif was taking.
And he didn't tell them.
He didn't tell them. Leif's team operated independently. They moved through the city alone, leaving themselves incredibly vulnerable to ambushes. During the after-action debrief, Jocko points out to Leif that he blatantly broke the law of cover and move.
Because he operated in a silo. Had Leif simply gotten on the radio and communicated his route to OP1, those snipers in the high-rise could have provided overwatch. They could have provided devastating cover fire if Leif's team was attacked while moving. And then, once Leif reached safety, his team could have covered OP1 as they extracted. By hyper-focusing only on his immediate group, he endangered the entire mission.
This is the ultimate military example of the silo mentality. And we see the exact same tribalism in corporate structures every day.
Why does corporate tribalism happen?
Often because of misaligned incentives. Departments are given isolated key performance indicators and isolated budgets. The authors give a fantastic example of a production manager at a manufacturing firm who absolutely despises a subsidiary transport company.
He is sitting in a meeting with the consultants, just tearing into the transport guys. He's saying, those guys are completely incompetent, they're always late, they ruin our production schedules. And then he delivers the classic silo line, but they aren't my problem. I've got my own production team to worry about.
This raises a critical question about the mechanics of corporate alignment. What happens when departments within the same parent company view each other as adversaries rather than allies? The consultants immediately correct this manager.
What do they tell him?
They point out that the overarching corporate entity owns both his production team and the transport team. It is all one single mission, delivering a product to the customer and generating revenue. The transport company is absolutely his problem. If transport fails to deliver the goods, the parent company fails to generate revenue, And eventually, the production manager's budget gets slashed.
They are all wearing the same jersey, but they are fighting each other for the ball. Departments have to break down these artificial silos. They have to cover and move for each other. If the transport division is struggling with logistics, the production manager needs to walk over to their office, figure out what constraints they are facing, and see if production can adjust their loading schedules to help transport succeed. You cannot win the war if you are actively letting your sister battalion get wiped out.
Moving from alignment to execution, we encounter the next law of combat. Simple. The fundamental truth of warfare and of business is that the environment is inherently complex. Variables are constantly shifting. Therefore, the plans you create to navigate that environment must be rigorously simple.
Because if a plan is too complex, with too many contingencies and convoluted steps, it will inevitably shatter the moment it encounters high-stress friction.
Exactly. Complexity is often a hiding place for insecure leaders. They think a 90-slide deck with complex flowcharts proves how smart they are. But the corporate example the authors provide here highlights the tragedy of complexity. They are consulting at a manufacturing plant, and they are talking to a frontline employee who is holding his monthly bonus sheet.
And what's on the sheet?
The employee is utterly baffled. The sheet in his hand just has the number .84 printed on it, and underneath that, a bonus payout of $423. He asks the consultants, what does .84 mean?
He has no idea.
No idea what specific metrics triggered that number, what his target was supposed to be, or what actionable steps he can take on the factory floor tomorrow to increase that payout. He mentions that last month, he worked just as hard, but made less money.
It is a profound failure of leadership. How can you possibly expect a team to optimize their performance if they need a PhD in advanced mathematics just to understand their own incentive structure? If the troops do not intimately understand the plan, they cannot execute it. The leader must distill the complexity of the market into a simple, digestible objective.
Which leads seamlessly into the third law in combat, which is critical when a simple plan collides with absolute chaos, prioritize, and execute. The combat narrative for this law is one of the most intense in the entire text. It details an engagement known as the Hornet's Nest.
Oh man, this story will make your heart rate spike just reading it. Leif and his SEAL element, along with Iraqi troops, pushed deep into a highly hostile sector of south-central Ramadi. They established a stronghold in a building, and as soon as the sun came up, all hell broke loose.
They were surrounded. They started taking intense, concentrated machine gun fire from multiple elevated positions. The bullets were hitting the walls of their building with the concussive force of sledgehammers. Then, insurgent snipers began taking precise shots through the windows. Then, rocket-propelled grenades started slamming into the exterior walls.
Just one thing after another.
And right as Leif is trying to organize a defense, one of his SEALs runs up to him and reports that they found a massive IED, an improvised explosive device, wired inside the very building they are currently using for cover.
The cognitive overload in that moment is unimaginable. A human brain isn't designed to process 5 separate, immediate existential threats at the exact same time. It's literal chaos. In a moment like that, a leader can easily become paralyzed by panic, or they can make the fatal mistake of trying to solve all the problems simultaneously.
But Leif falls back on the mental framework drilled into him by Jocko. Relax, look around, make a call. You have to detach from the panic. You cannot handle 10 life-threatening problems simultaneously. The mechanism of prioritize and execute requires a leader to rapidly evaluate the landscape, identify the single highest priority threat, the one that will kill them first, focus all available resources and manpower on neutralizing that specific threat, execute the solution, and only then shift focus to the very next priority.
So Leif evaluates. The bomb in the building is terrifying, but if they don't neutralize the machine gunners and snipers actively pouring fire into their positions right now, they won't live long enough to worry about the bomb.
Exactly.
He prioritizes establishing security perimeters and directing return fire to suppress the enemy. Once they gain fire superiority, he can then execute the next priority of organizing an extraction route away from the IED.
The authors translate this cognitive discipline directly to the corporate world. They describe a pharmaceutical company that was facing severe financial distress. They were losing market share, patents were expiring, and revenue was tanking. The executive team was in a state of absolute panic.
So what do they do?
So they reacted exactly how untrained leaders react in a firefight. They tried to shoot at every target at once. They launched dozens of new strategic initiatives simultaneously.
New marketing campaigns, aggressive R&D pushes, restructuring departments, opening new territories.
And because they tried to do everything at once, they spread their capital, their bandwidth, and their manpower so thin that they succeeded at absolutely nothing. They exhausted their team and accelerated their financial decline. A corporate leader must have the discipline to step back, detach from the anxiety of a plunging stock price, and determine the single highest priority initiative that will stop the bleeding. They must focus all resources on executing that one initiative flawlessly, and only when it is stable, move to priority number 2, prioritize and execute.
So I want to ask you, the listener, right now, what is your hornet's nest protocol? When you open your laptop on a Tuesday morning and your inbox is exploding, 3 major client projects are on fire, and your boss is pinging you for an urgent update, how do you react? Are you wildly firing off half-written emails and trying to dodge all the bullets at once? Or do you have the discipline to shut your door, look at the board, pick the priority that is aiming directly at your head, and execute a solution?
That's the real test.
Okay, we've established how a team moves and how they prioritize. But as an organization scales, we run into a major structural question: who is actually making the calls?
This brings us to the architecture of organizational leadership, specifically the concept of decentralized command. The underlying logic here isn't just a military preference. It is based on fundamental human cognitive limitations. Think of George Miller's psychological law, the magical number 7 plus or minus 2. Human beings generally do not possess the cognitive bandwidth to directly, effectively manage more than 6 to 10 people at a time, especially in high-friction environments where contingencies constantly arise.
If a CEO tries to directly make every decision for a 50-person company, they become a massive bottleneck and the company grinds to a halt. You have to break the organization down into smaller, manageable elements, each with a designated leader.
But you cannot just assign a manager and say, go figure it out. For decentralized command to function without devolving into anarchy, the junior leaders must possess a crystal clear understanding of 2 foundational elements: the commander's intent and their left and right limits.
Let's unpack those mechanisms. The commander's intent is the ultimate objective. It's not the step-by-step instructions, it's the overriding purpose. We need to secure this neighborhood so the engineers can rebuild the bridge. In business, it might be, we need to capture 15% market share in this new demographic by Q4. But the left and right limits are equally crucial.
Left and right limits are the established boundaries of a subordinate's decision-making authority. You don't want managers functioning as mindless robots waiting for top-down orders, but you also don't want rogue executives running wild and exposing the company to massive risk. The authors highlight this with an example of a highly aggressive, incredibly talented vice president of emerging markets.
Oh, this guy.
Yeah.
This VP was a superstar on paper. He was driving massive growth, flying all over the globe, and establishing highly profitable footholds in new territories. But he was simultaneously causing absolute chaos and friction for the parent company.
Because he was operating completely outside his left and right limits. He was signing massive contracts and making strategic promises without communicating his moves back to corporate headquarters, which meant that the legal department couldn't properly vet the international contracts, the supply chain wasn't prepared to handle the sudden surge in volume, and HR couldn't hire support staff fast enough.
It's just a mess behind the scenes.
Right. Decentralized command is not a blank check. It requires intense proactive communication and a mutual understanding of boundaries.
Which perfectly sets up the next dynamic, the flow of leadership. Most people assume leadership is gravity, it only flows downward. But the source material radically redefines this by separating it into 2 distinct actions, leading down and leading up.
Let's look at leading down first. Leif admits to a massive failure in this regard during his pre-deployment training.
What happened?
During a highly complex training workup, Leif got so completely bogged down in the tactical minutia, coordinating helicopter landing zones, calculating timing routes, managing ammunition loads, that he forgot his primary duty as a leader. He never took the time to step back and explain the overarching strategic goals to his own SEAL platoon. He just handed them a spreadsheet and told them what to do without ever explaining why they were doing it.
Consequently, his team lacked buy-in. They were confused, frustrated, and their performance suffered. If your team doesn't understand the strategic picture, you aren't leading them, you are just dictating tasks. But the concept of leading up is even more fascinating and, frankly, much harder to implement.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, the defining story for leading up occurs just prior to a major operation in Ramadi. Leaf is running on zero sleep, stressed to the max, finalizing the tactical details for a dangerous nighttime raid. Suddenly, the Tactical Operations Center, which we can think of as the corporate headquarters of the battlefield, the TOC, radios down.
And what they want.
They demand updated seating charts for the Humvees and the exact names of every single Iraqi soldier participating in the raid. Leaf absolutely loses his temper.
He is furious. He's thinking, I'm about to take men into a gunfight, and these bureaucrats sitting in an air-conditioned bunker want to micromanage my seating charts. They have no idea what we are dealing with out here.
Jocko happens to walk into the room as Leif is venting this frustration, and Jocko has to step in, act as the voice of reason, and completely reframe Leif's perspective. He tells Leif, leadership doesn't just flow down the chain of command, but up as well. Jocko explains that the commanders in the TOC aren't asking for seating charts just to be annoying or bureaucratic.
So there was a valid reason.
Yes. They carry the immense weight of approving a highly dangerous mission. They need that specific situational awareness, knowing exactly who is in what vehicle, so that if a Humvee hits an IED or a squad gets ambushed, the TOC can instantly coordinate the correct medical evacuation and support assets.
If we pull this out of Ramadi and drop it into a corporate headquarters, it fundamentally changes the entire dynamic of the employee-boss relationship. The authors recount talking to a field manager at a large corporation who just despises the executive suite. He complains to the consultants. Corporate is completely clueless. They just don't get what we're dealing with out here in the field. They constantly barrage us with spreadsheet requests and annoying questions that prevents from actually getting the job done.
And the consultants use the exact same Socratic method Jocko used. They ask this field manager, do you genuinely believe that the corporate executives want you to fail? Do you think they're actively trying to bankrupt their own company?
And the manager has to pause and admit, well, no, obviously not. So I had to challenge this on behalf of the listener. What does this practically mean for a mid-level manager who feels crushed between their team and their boss? I can hear people saying, I already have a full-time job managing my team. If I have to constantly manage my boss's anxieties, doesn't leading up just mean I'm doing my boss's job for them?
It absolutely might feel that way, but extreme ownership dictates that you must take total ownership of the information flow. If your boss is constantly asking you annoying, micromanaging questions, you cannot get angry. You have to realize that it is your fault for not providing them with the clear, proactive situational awareness they need to feel comfortable.
Wow, turning it back on yourself again.
Always. If corporate doesn't understand the harsh realities of the field conditions, it's not their fault for being ignorant. It is your job to educate them. You need to simplify the data, anticipate their concerns, and maybe even invite the executives out to the field to walk the site with you. You have to take ownership of your boss's understanding of your world.
That is right, there was more to it.
Much more. It was his extreme ownership of his environment and his positioning. He didn't just walk out and hope to find a good vantage point. He would spend hours meticulously studying patrol routes, analyzing building layouts, and coordinating with ground elements to position himself in the exact, perfectly optimized location to provide devastating overwatch.
He aggressively made his own luck. He dictated the terms of the engagement. But the deeper lesson here is about a leader's ability to act when they don't have all the facts. On a battlefield, or in a volatile market, a leader will almost never have a 100% complete picture. There is always missing intelligence.
Exactly. In the corporate world, waiting for a perfect picture is a death sentence. The authors provide a highly relatable example of Darla, the CEO of a rapidly scaling software and engineering firm. Darla has a massive problem. One of her senior executive leaders is incredibly toxic.
Toxic how?
This executive is creating a hostile work environment, hoarding information, and actively destroying the morale of the entire engineering team.
Darla knows this person is a cancer in her organization. She sees the turnover rates. But when she sits down with the consultants, she refuses to make a definitive decision to fire him. She rationalizes her hesitation. She says, I just don't have all the hard data yet. I think I better just let this play its course a little longer. Let's wait and see if he turns it around.
And the consultants have to deliver a very harsh reality check to Darla. They explain that in leadership, inaction is a decision. By deciding to wait and see, Darla is actively deciding to allow a cancer to metastasize within her company culture. She is deciding to let her best engineers suffer and potentially quit under toxic leadership. You can never wait for a perfect, 100% risk-free, totally clear picture, because by the time the picture is perfectly clear, the damage is already done. A leader must cultivate the discipline to be comfortable in the chaos, weigh the risks, and act decisively with the best available information they have at that moment.
Which requires immense discipline. And that concept of discipline serves as the capstone for the entire framework, introducing the dichotomy of leadership. The central thesis is that discipline equals freedom. A true leader must walk a ridiculously fine, delicate tightrope every single day. They have to balance seemingly contradictory qualities simultaneously.
It is the ultimate balancing act. The book lists these dichotomies clearly. A leader must be close to their team, building deep bonds of trust and empathy, but they cannot be too close. They are still the boss and must be capable of making hard, objective calls. A leader must have the confidence to lead from the front, but also the supreme humility to follow when a subordinate has a better tactical idea.
They have to aggressively exercise extreme ownership over every detail, while simultaneously stepping back and allowing decentralized command to flourish. They have nothing to prove, because their rank or title already establishes that they are in charge, but they have absolutely everything to prove every single day in order to earn and maintain the respect of their team.
To ground this dichotomy in business, they detail a strategic conflict between a CEO named Andy and his chief financial officer. Andy's company owns several divisions, and one of them, an electrical division, is consistently losing money. It lacks strict financial discipline and is a drain on the quarterly balance sheet. The CFO looks at the spreadsheets and says, "We need to shut this division down immediately. It's hurting our margins."
But Andy, the CEO, pushes back. He wants to keep the division running, even at a loss, because he sees a strategic advantage. In the construction industry, bidding on massive contracts often requires a company to offer a full suite of services, including electrical. Andy believes that taking a short-term loss on this division gives the company the strategic freedom to win massive, multi-year contracts 5 years down the road.
This debate perfectly encapsulates the dichotomy. Leadership is balancing that immediate, strict financial discipline demanded by the CFO against the broader, long-term strategic freedom envisioned by the CEO. It is never just a simple black and white binary answer. You cannot just run an algorithm to solve it. Leadership is a dynamic, constant, daily calibration of these opposing forces.
Which brings us full circle to our starting premise. There is no precise, clean engineering formula for managing human beings in high-stakes environments. The operating system of extreme ownership requires constant adjustment, immense psychological humility, and an unrelenting, uncompromising commitment to owning every single outcome in your world.
That is the burden and that is the privilege of leadership.
So let's recap our journey through these muddy waters today. We started by looking in the mirror. We learned that the first, most terrifying step is taking absolute 100% extreme ownership of everything in your world, especially the failures, the dropped balls, and the missed targets. We realized that there are no bad teams, only bad leaders who tolerate substandard performance. We learned that to authentically lead, you must actively seek out the why to build belief, and you must ruthlessly check your ego at the door, taking off those noise-canceling headphones so you can hear the truth. We translated the laws of combat to the boardroom, breaking down tribal silos to cover and move for your teammates, keeping your operational plans relentlessly zipply. And when the hornet's nest of cognitive overload is buzzing, having the discipline to prioritize and execute the single most lethal threat. We discovered that human bandwidth requires decentralized command, that you must take ownership of leading up the chain to educate your boss, and that you must have the courage to make decisive calls, even when the intelligence is murky. These aren't just military anecdotes. These are fundamental operating protocols that you can install in your own professional and personal life right now.
And as we conclude this analysis, there is one final overarching concept drawn from the source materials afterward that every listener should deeply consider. Throughout history, people have endlessly debated the question, are leaders born or made? The authors, drawing on decades of training the most elite warriors on Earth, are definitive on this point. Leaders are made, they are forged, they are built through repetition, humility, practice, and the painful willingness to accept constructive criticism. Anyone, regardless of their natural disposition, can develop into a highly effective leader if they are willing to adopt this unyielding mindset. But here is the ultimate provocative thought for you to mull over as you walk into your next meeting. The authors state that the ultimate goal of all leaders should be to work themselves out of a job.
Let that truly sink in for a moment. Work yourself out of a job.
It runs counter to every corporate instinct we have about job security and indispensable value. But think about the mechanics of it. If you are truly exercising extreme ownership, you are constantly training, mentoring, and elevating your junior leaders. You are communicating the overarching strategy so clearly and empowering them with so much decentralized command that they eventually possess all the skills necessary to run the division without you. If you do your job perfectly, your team will become entirely self-sufficient and fully capable of replacing you. And rather than viewing that as a threat to your status, you must recognize it as your ultimate victory. Because when your team can operate flawlessly without your constant micromanagement, it frees you up to elevate your own vision, move up the strategic chain, and conquer the next great challenge.
The ultimate flex of a great leader isn't how much the team needs them. It's how completely the team can succeed without them. So the next time you find yourself standing in that metaphorical boardroom, staring down a massive failure, and you feel that overwhelming urge to point at the supply chain, the market conditions, or the incompetence of your team, remember the terrifying, chaotic streets of Ramadi. Put down the pointer, look in the mirror, throw away the folder of excuses, and take ownership. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. Now step out on your own battlefield and lead.